Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdic Steve, and today I'm joined by Peter Atkinson. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm feeling nerdy. I'm doing great.
I,
Let's
I,
go
you
get
know,
it.
I'm very excited to have you on. You're a bit of a kind of an idol for me because, like, I like all the nerdy stuff and the D&D stuff, but I also very much like the business side of things as well. And
Oh,
and that's
yeah.
kind of how like I got into doing Nerdarchy, and like you you started Wizards of the Coast, you bought TSR, you've had Gen Con, you own Gen Con maybe for the second time.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. The convention I love so much, I bought it twice, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I love talking about the business of games.
So
I'm
and
not saying I'm very good at it. I got lucky. I rolled a lot of 20s, David. I rolled a lot of 20s.
well, it's funny because like I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur, and like my mentor in the online space is like, you're a dungeon master, you should do D&D. I'm like, there's no money in that, nobody cares about that. It's just this fun stupid thing that I enjoy.
Right.
And that's kind of what like caused us to start poking around and be like, oh my god, there are people that are doing this and people are into it. Like we found a couple YouTube channels with like 20 and 30,000 subscribers. um you know, this is going back like 7 years compared to now. Right now, that's peanuts. It's nothing. You
Yeah.
know, there's a bunch of channels that are over 200,000 and
Yeah.
channels closing in on three. So the hobby's grown.
Right. And I think that's awesome. I like you. I grew up playing D&D in the 80s or, way back. And it was there was back then there was nothing cool about being a geek. I mean, well, it was cool. We just nobody knew it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, it was cool to us,
it
but
was cool to us.
the outside looking in, not so much.
But now I think it's great that D&D the tabletop games become part of the national conversation and accepted.
How did you get into gaming?
Well, I grew up a family of, I mean, like traditional games like card games and stuff like that. Our family played a lot of games as I was growing up. And then my dad, he was always interested in the military. He eventually joined the military, and while I was a kid, and so we got into war games because we just kind of became drawn to them. And I was in wargaming for a long time. The old classic Avalon Hill, SPI, hex maps with chits. We never did much miniatures because we were really poor and miniatures were expensive. And then at some point along the line, while I was looking at a new SPI game, this was in 1978, I saw Dungeons and Dragons sitting there beside it and a toy store and thought, hmm, on impulse, I just bought it and then I became hooked and been playing D&D ever since.
So that's interesting. So your dad went into the military kind of late. It
Yeah,
sounds
he
like.
did. Yeah, he was he did 2 or 3, he did whatever that, 3 year period when he was 18 or whatever,
Oh, okay,
right?
and then he
And
went back.
then he left.
Okay.
And he was a preacher. He went to a seminary and became a preacher man. But then I think he missed the military culture at some point. He decided to return to the military as a chaplain. So then he served as a chaplain for a number of years.
Getting some Warhammer vibes there.
Yeah. He was a very religious man. I think he was into the religion part for the right reason. But was also had that draw to the military.
Yeah.
Came from military. A lot of my uncles and grandfathers, great grandfathers, a lot of military service in the history of my family.
I have a lot of respect for people that are into religion for the right reasons and don't use it as a cudgel. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
mean,
what
we,
was
we
your
all need
game?
to we all need to find our way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What was your gaming experience like growing up in the 80s?
Well, yeah. So by the 80s, I was into Dungeons and Dragons. I started playing in 1978 and became obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. And I never and immediately into the creating my own world. Well, Chaldea, which of
Yeah.
course is what I'm promoting these days as my world. So a lot of the things, like I didn't get into playing all the other types of role-playing games that were coming out. I didn't really play much like GURPS or Call of Cthulhu or Rollmaster, the other big games of the 80s. I didn't I also don't have that common link with a lot of the adventure modules of the 80s, because I was always DMing and I was always creating my own stuff. And that really until I started Wizards of the Coast, that was my life. I mean, I've worked as an analyst. I had a day job.
So, how much in like the day to day of the Wizards of the Coast were you involved? Like after you guys acquired D&D, were you writing? Were you more like managing things?
I figured out, thankfully, very early that I wasn't a good game designer, and I did, and I also learned that even though I was okay at writing, I'm like having written more than actually writing. It was uh, writing Wizards of the Coast was definitely a company that was complex enough. It was a business that I spent most of my time doing business. But when we acquired TSR, Dungeons and Dragons, and Gen Con, by the way, was that was a personal passion for me. Since I'd played it since the early 80s, I became very hands-on with the development of third edition D&D. And so like I mean, really on day one, we said, yeah, we're going to do a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons. At that time, the edition was, AD&D second edition. And so I put together the design team, and I told all the management layers between me and the designers that you're not going to have a say in how third edition turns out. I had them all report to me. So that part I was very hands-on. But
Did
I,
you did you like hire and pick like Lockwood and War and like the art team for third edition, or did you have like an art director that kind of handled
well,
that?
we definitely had an art director, but we brought over the TSR. We brought over Don Murin, who was firmly doing a great job in that. I mean, when it came to Dungeons and Dragons, the art department wasn't the part that needed fixing. I mean, the art
Yeah,
department was fantastic, and Jeff Easley was still there. Todd Lockwood, yes, was there, and I mean, that part was fantastic. That was like, just don't mess it up, right? Let it go.
oh, yeah, but I feel like there was definitely like a transition that codified it, the visual aspects of the game from
Yeah, but
second to
yeah,
third.
but they actually came up with it. I mean, I had meetings with Don and the artist, and
Yeah,
I said, what I want a more gritty feel. I talked a little bit about direction of D&D from a concept perception. Like I'm tired of seeing a fantasy character who's not carrying any of the things. You see a wizard that's got a staff and that's it. Like
yeah,
what,
yeah.
you know,
Where's his
or whatever.
backpack at?
Yeah, where's the backpack? Where's the darts?
Yeah.
Where's the lantern? Where's all the stuff? So I did have that sort of input, but the artists, they went and ran with it from there.
Yeah, I really so we spent a lot of time in third edition, and I remember like I kind of drug my group kicking and screaming into third edition, and I would get the Dragon magazines, and it would have like the updates of kind of like what's coming,
Right.
and this stuff was like so fantastic to me, and kind of like codified and unified the game, and it's like we don't have weird math anymore. We have just well we have more regular math, right? And it all kind of went in the same direction at least.
Right. Yeah, it's like high number. You should always want to roll high. That was like that was a revolution.
Yeah,
Third
yeah.
edition. Fixing the initiative system and stuff. I mean, I have a lot of respect for AD&D. I still DM AD&D from time to time, but boy, I had a lot of house rules.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing too, is like when when I look back at AD&D compared to more modern systems, is the design great? No, but like you're comparing the bar to the bar, right? They had nothing to go on. They made it up, right? And
Right.
they blazed the trail for everyone else that made it easier for great designers to build upon that.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. You're right. There were a lot of design problems, but for a first time out, I think Richard Garfield is a dear friend of mine, and designer Magic the Gathering. he once said that he thought Dungeons and Dragons as was the greatest step forward in gaming in the history of gaming, um, and because it was so incremental to what was already out there, such a big step up. And I've been more critical of second edition, actually, to be honest, because I feel like by the time second edition came out, they could have there was enough RPG design technology out there
Yeah.
that they could have way more dramatically improved it than they did. So
So
I like to say I play the odd versions of Dungeons and Dragons.
the odds. Nice. I've definitely heard that before. Rivers RPG channel wants to know what's your favorite edition. I feel like you might be biased though.
Well, I see the good and the warts in all the editions. To be honest, like I a lot of it depends. I get kind of moody. I kind of change my mind. Sometimes I'm like really into like I want to go old school, play AD&D. Sometimes I want to be modern and play what all the kids are playing, play fifth edition. And sometimes I'm feel like, well, I want to play the version that has my name in the credits, so let's play third. I hate to be so wishy-washy. If you pin me down, okay, I would say third edition because I'm so close to it. But I think also third edition suffered from too much power escalation. Needing a spreadsheet to run it. And so of course, then people say, "Oh, fifth edition's so much easier," but I got to say, it's really not that much easier.
Nah, so
it's
5e it's my favorite edition, but only because they were able to capture a lot of the things I liked from previous editions and put it into one, and it has like a it really gives off the first and second edition vibes about how the game kind of plays as when you run it as the dungeon master. But at the same time, they didn't exactly take any big swings for the fence either with 5e. It's pretty, the design was very, well, it's very good. It's also very safe. So
yeah, I told, I remember having a conversation with Mike Merles a number of years, not long after it came out. And I said, I think that 5e is very close to where 30 would have landed if we'd have taken another year of playtesting or something and sort of dialed back some of the power escalation problems with third edition and stuff. But there was a lot to love about where it was, and hey, give the gamers some power escalation problems. That's nothing wrong with that.
But I mean, it's creeping into 5e. Like they're gonna see it as well as the game expands.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just it's the nature of the beast. So Chaldea, we've talked about Chaldea a little bit on here before because we've had Sarah Moore on.
Yes. Thank you, by the way.
Oh no, it was our pleasure. She's an absolute delight.
Oh, she is. Love her.
But that being said, I learned valuable lessons too, like get nice and drunk for your next job interview. I think was one of them that came out. No, so Chaldea is like the world that you run. That's like your D&D campaign.
Yeah, D&D and Burning Wheel. We haven't mentioned that part of my gaming. I since the turn of the century, I've probably run more Burning Wheel than D&D. Those are my two systems of choice. And it is the world, the evolution of the world that I've been running since 1980, something like that. That's right.
Yeah. So do you have a group that you've been running the whole time with that, or has it been different iterations?
It's like this evolving thing, it's like a theater group, like over time people peel off, new people come in, people come back, people die, that sucks. I mean, we're all getting old enough now that we're starting to have friends that are missing in our lives. And there is at least a couple of people. I'm thinking of Daryl Judd and Terry Campbell, old friends of mine, who were in the initial conversation with me about starting Wizards of the Coast back in 1980-ish. I'm not quite sure exactly when. And they still play. We still play together from time to time, but we don't live in the same city.
Yeah.
Most of the DMing I do these days is it's usually a different group of people, an evolving group of people. Although Terry is in one of those groups, so.
You've taken this world of Chaldea, which was your your gaming, kind of your gaming group, your campaign setting, and now you've kind of taken and expanded beyond that. So you're going beyond the table.
Yes. So with the Chaldea, we're a YouTube channel, as you know, World of Chaldea on YouTube, and we don't look at it. I don't look at it as much as a game as I look at it as the central part of what we're doing is telling a story. And so it's like any other story. There's a group of protagonists. Some of these characters are based off of characters that players created, like Jonas Octani and Xena Drelistas. Those two characters definitely. But we took control of them and re-envisioned them for because a series of D&D games does not create a great story. It creates a great story about the game, and those of us who played in the game together have stories. But in terms of narrative structure as to what works as a story you're trying to tell other people that you want, you kind of have to start over and say, okay, let's look at this world and these characters as like a treasure chest full of interesting ideas. But we have to re-glue them together in a different way.
That makes a lot of sense. That is the reason why I don't actually like watching stream games, is because I think they're a lot more fun to play in than they are to watch. But so a lot of people like that as well. Like the biggest example is Critical Role. I'm like, that is 2 hours of amazing content stretched over like 4 or 5 hours because that's what an RPG game is, right? It's like hanging out with your friends.
I know Jeff Grubb told me once, RPG session is 20 hours of excitement crammed into 4 hours. Or 20 minutes of excitement. Yeah, 20 minutes. I said that one wrong. Boy, I hate it when you misdeliver a joke. That sucks.
It happens, especially when we're doing it live.
I know. Can we re-edit? Can we edit that out? Can I retake that?
Yeah. So I just had a quick thought when I was listening to you talking about Chaldea. Like, I'm curious because you've had so much history with the game. What are your thoughts on a D&D movie?
Well, the one that was made under my watch was horrible, but I'll quickly say I had nothing to do with it. We
Got it.
I don't know where the rights stand. When we bought TSR, a piece of TSR that was just horribly that just sucked, that we just had to hold our nose because we had no choice, was that the previous owner had signed away all the rights, all the movie rights for Dungeons and Dragons in perpetuity. With no creative control to somebody who really wasn't shouldn't have had those rights. So I don't know. I haven't been involved with Wizards for almost for 20 years now. So in fact, 20 years this month. Wow, interesting.
Forget all that. What is your opinion of what a D&D movie should be?
Well, you don't want to hear you got to go back to telling a story. I mean, it's what we're trying to do with Chaldea. You got to forget it's Dungeons and Dragons. Other than that, I like to say, great story is about great characters. You got to get a group of characters that we're rooting for, that we're attached to right off the bat. And I love fantasy. I love Dungeons and Dragons. But the way I approach Chaldea, the fantasy is just like a skin. It's like, wallpaper you put up on your computer screen. It's a flavoring that. And it's important flavor, and it lets you do epic things and stuff like that. But at the core of it, it's about a story. So a D&D movie has to have that first. It's got to have a group of compelling characters that you really fall in love with and that you're rooting for. And then, they're doing something in fantasy world.
I think so. You were introduced to me by Seth Polanski.
Yes. Yeah. Seth, he's doing that documentary on TSR.
Yeah, they did Eye of the Beholder.
Yeah, the Eye of the Beholder, and he's doing one on Magic Gathering now too.
Yeah. I think they're talking about it now. I'm not sure or not, but I kind of guessed it was kind of easy. It seemed like the progression. But he also did like a dramedy called Of Dice and Men.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's definitely worth a watch if you haven't. And like if you have Amazon Prime, I'm pretty sure you can watch it over there. But it was about basically like a D&D group,
right?
And then like you would have like the stuff that would happen in the real world, and then stuff that was happening, in the game. and how it kind of was all interconnected and about these relationships between these people. Um, and I used to be like, and I guess like the gamers kind of did like that as well, right? Back quite a
Yeah,
ways ago.
yeah. I mean, that's the other, or Queen's Gambit, right? It's not it's a movie about somebody who plays chess, and
Yeah.
about her. You could certainly step out of the fantasy world and talk and make a movie about the people that play it. Sure, that's another way of doing it.
I used to be dead set against it, but then I was like, if they just turn the D&D movie into a fantasy movie, it won't like mean anything. It might be a good movie, but it won't mean anything for D&D, I don't think.
Hmm.
I could be wrong, but
You could be right too. I mean,
yeah,
I
who
mean,
knows?
I think you could pick a number of different options,
Yeah.
and whether or not it's a good movie is going to come down to the execution more than the general concept. You could do a great movie or a horrible one that's about that's set within the fantasy world, a bunch of D&D characters running around killing monsters, like the one that was made in the 90s, or a bunch of people like to play D&D.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of people would love to see like something in the Forgotten Realms, like Dritz Duerden or Dragonlance. And I was like, but will that really like? I guess I look at it from the standpoint of someone who just really loves the game and would love to see a movie that
Yeah.
promotes the game and brings it to the forefront for people.
I think you're right about Dragonlance or Forgotten Realms, and Dritz is a great example. I mean, Dritz is probably the most interesting character published by that's popular. The combination of interesting and popular.
Yeah,
Dritz has both of those elements to the character. I think there's the fact that he's drow and it's a dark elf, and there's some obstacles that wizards would face.
yeah, for sure.
Figuring out how to tell that story in today's culture, but it would be why not leverage a big name out of the Dungeons and Dragons mythology.
Yeah, I'd asked RA, and you can imagine what his thoughts were.
Well, and I'm curious, what were his thoughts? I mean, I imagine he'd be
Oh yeah, he wants to see the Icewind Dale trilogy for sure.
yeah.
Wait, and again, like I think they would be great fantasy stories, but like I just want to see. I guess I want to see a movie that promotes D&D and gets it even deeper into the mainstream. I just want more people playing the game. I guess that's my ultimate goal.
Well, I'm with you there, brother. That's I think it's fantastic that there are so many people now that like D&D, and that it's I don't quite understand streaming in the sense of people watching that so many people watch other people play D&D. To me, that's not very, very interesting. I understand when it's actors and they're really funny and good looking. Okay, I can see some of the appeal there, but can't imagine why anybody watch you or me, playing D&D. A couple old white guys.
Yeah, we were pretty
together.
We were pretty early, so like we started doing that like a year before Critical Role, and at the time, I feel like the only person really doing it was like it me JP on his channel, and they they were like the first ones. They were like kind of like pioneering it.
Right.
So it was really bizarre. And we're like, well, we're playing. I guess we can record it and put it up. And it wasn't live. It was just us. And it was terrible. It was awful. Like we had a webcam on like the far end of the table, and it's just this long shot. And and our gaming table is a pool table that's been covered over top of, so it's really wide, so it's hard to like get good angles or good shots. And
right
and like we've had like toddlers Godzilla across the table during gameplay, and it was just like,
that was probably good
bizarre.
though. That was probably now that's really good when you can get toddlers to Godzilla across the table. I mean, yeah.
So,
or
you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised what makes the internet angry.
There I disagree. I no longer can be surprised about I cut my teeth on internet flame wars, and 1994 after Magic the Gathering came out, and like, you destroyed hobby gaming, or this card is broken, it's the end of Magic.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh
That's
my god,
true.
that was
What one of your cards did get Nerdarchist Ted ostracized from a store. He had bought, I don't know if it was a Black Lotus or one of the, or the Mox Diamond, I don't know, one of the expensive cards. I don't really know much about Magic, to be honest with you, but he bought like this expensive card. He had it for years and years, and he was selling his collection. And he took it to like the one of the big stores, and they're like, oh, this is a fake. And he didn't know, so he's like, oh well, I want to take it back because I want to get a second opinion. And then like the store that the store he took it to for a second opinion just went back to that store, and so they like banned him.
oh my gosh.
Like they like he was trying to get over on that. But I know Ted. He's not like that at all. He just like he. It's like, you went to the doctors and they're like, hey, you got cancer and you're gonna die. You might want to go see if someone else agrees with that or not.
So it really was a fake card then?
Yeah, it was really a fake card. And and I don't think I don't think he presented it as, oh, I'm trying to sell it here. I think he presented it as like, hey, I want to check this thing out.
Well, yeah, I mean, nowadays a Black Lotus in good condition could be worth $100,000. So yeah, you'd want to get a second opinion on that.
Yeah,
sure.
well, he ended up like selling off his Magic collection and buying a car. So,
yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
Good way to go.
So, Chaldea, you think that will ever be an RPG?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not going to do it. I'm too old and only handle one thing. I mean, my focus is to make a great story.
Yeah.
And to try and build a YouTube presence, a social media presence, and then if people find it appealing, if people, it's always the question: well, is anybody gonna like this or not? If people like it and it becomes the thing, then we'll license it, and we are building a world, and we're certainly building a story, lots of characters. It's deeply rooted in Dungeons and Dragons, but only the feel of it. Of course, we're not using any copyrighted material or anything like that. So I think that I like the idea that I think a lot of D&D players will find it accessible. It's got a lot of the traditional sort of fantasy things, elves and dwarves and dragons and undead, and
So what are the elements that you would say make it a unique world?
Well, I love history, and so it's very heavily inspired. Every human kingdom is inspired by some real world place and time, and we use being a D&D player from the 80s. The mythology is all real world mythology. So the Greek gods and the Norse gods and the Chinese gods and so on and so forth. And I would say it's pretty epic. Like, when I played D&D, we did a lot of power gaming back in the 80s, and the first product Wizards of the Coast made was a book that Steve Connard, who's my partner on this, we co-authored that book along with a couple other friends of ours. It was all about playing gods in RPGs, so it's called the Primal Order, and so it was about gods in role-playing games. And so there's I don't like the idea that the gods are old and distant. I like the idea that the gods in fantasy in this world are young and obnoxious and they're around. And so there's a lot of there's an epic feel to the story and the play.
Kind of like the opening from the old Kevin Sorbo Hercules TV show.
Yeah,
the gods are cruel and petty.
Yes, the gods are cruel and petty, and they're active. And so, like we have several demigods right on the prime material plane, right in the middle of the story, and the full deities are not far away.
So how much of a setback was 2020 towards the YouTube channel and telling this story?
Yeah, well, 2020 was a setback mainly for my Gen Con business. Obviously, Gen Con is an event for 70,000 gamers in Indianapolis. So we're bullseye to the types of businesses most impacted by COVID. So we didn't have an in-person show last year. We're not sure what Gen Con is going to look like this year. So it was an epic challenge for us financially. So we didn't, we decided that we made a commitment to our employees. We didn't lay anybody off. Um, and so we kept our team together. And so somehow we're going to figure out a way through this. But my Chaldea business is funded by my share of the profits out of Gen Con. So it hurt that business as well. But we had enough money already put away to launch Chaldea. We launched in December 20th, 2020. And what really hurt us as far as COVID is that we stopped work that we would be doing on future chapters, future seasons. Like, season 2 we will have a longer wait before season 2 because we weren't able to keep working on, we didn't have enough money to do that. We couldn't do a film shoot in 2020. So
yeah, that's definitely a thing. Do you guys, I guess, it's so hard. Like we were talking about this earlier, is like, it's so hard to plan anything, beyond this year. Cause we just don't know. Is it going to open up in the summer? Is it going to open up in, in the winter time? Just because some people decide to open up, is it safe to open up? Like, it's all these things that we all have to like figure out.
Yeah, I don't envy David Hoppy, who's the president of Gen Con. He's the one in the driver's seat on this business. I quit running it myself years ago, and that's a tough question. It feels almost cocky to plan on a world past COVID, right? I mean, like, COVID is such an impact on our lives and so bad. But intellectually, I think we all believe, we're going to come out of this. There's going to be an end to this. Every other pandemic in history had a beginning, middle, and end. This one should too. We have better tools. We're smarter, so on. But it still feels like hubris at some level.
And also too, it's like that's in the backdrop of like Australia was on fire. California was on fire. All the different social movements that were going on at the time, murder hornets. So,
I know.
Like, I couldn't write a better like RPG scenario than 2020.
Pretty bad. Just every day as a GM, just think of the worst thing you can think of, and then when you get that feeling. Luke Crane likes to say, when you get that feeling in your gut, like, oh, I'm going too far, that's when you know you're on the right track. As a GM.
We ran a Cypher System game on the channel that was like a mashup of Flash Gordon and Thundar the Barbarian, and like I said it, I set like the opening in the backdrop of 2020, and then fast forwarded the timeline a little bit, and it just felt appropriate.
Oh my gosh.
But matter of fact, also Thundar the Barbarian happens in the year 2020. So it was just like so perfect. Kaywood Publishing wants to know what you think of VTTs.
I had to think for a second. VTT, virtual, you like Roll20 and
yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that came out of COVID that were bright spots for me in terms of like, making the best of a situation. One of it is that kind of forced me to learn these. I'd never used Roll20 or Discord or Fantasy Grounds. And so I was GMing quite a bit virtually for a while, like in the summer. And it's like, okay, we're still playing and I'm learning this thing. And then at some point, it's like, oh man, I think I'm just gonna wait until I can play in person again. I mean, but it's a lot. I mean, it's great that the option is there, especially for people who are a bit more patient than I am with the technology, and maybe don't have the luxury of having friends that live near them where they can play. And the tools are getting better, and it's enabled the whole paradigm of streaming and Twitch games and doing what we're doing. So that's all good, but I rather play around a table.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of us that would, and also too, like I think people get a little too bogged down in like that side of it. Like they feel like if they're playing online, they have to use these tool sets. Where I mean, you just open up a Zoom window like we've got here and do theater of the mind like we used to do when we were kids, right?
Yeah,
But and it's even
yeah,
better because you can screen share images and
yeah, yeah. Then that's exactly right. It is. I think that's the way to do it. I went down trying to make maps and figuring out the fog of war and oh my gosh, like then it became like such a so much work to GM, like having to prepare. Like you could, if you're playing around a table and you've got a mat and pins and everything, you can just draw stuff on the fly and it's really quick and put out miniatures and go. But it was harder it was less efficient time wise to run a game, unless you went theater of the mind. So yeah, I'm running a game at GaryCon. It's going to be AD&D, and it's going to be theater of the mind. We'll just use a virtual share, just to be able to see each other and something like Zoom, and that's all we need.
yeah. So Kaywood is saying what they do is like they have a camera at the table and the camera at the DM, and they have their minis and terrain, the maps and stuff just all laid out, and it's kind of like screen shared, I guess. Which is what we started doing with Ted's game as well, because he likes crafting and using terrain, and so he just sets up a second camera and has everything there. So we have kind of a bird's eye view of it. I've done everything from using a program called Dungeon Fog, which is a great mapping tool and building maps, and just kind of like it almost is like a VTT Lite, where you can like share your map, and you can do Fog of World, the Fog of War, but it's like room by room, so it kind of makes it easy to like
Yeah,
open it
yeah,
up. So I've done that, or I've done with one of the other games where I just find a map online, screen share it, and use the drawing tools in Zoom to be like, these X's are the monsters and you guys are the O's or whatever.
yeah, yeah. Which is kind of how we did it back in the early days of
Yeah.
D&D. Just or we'd have like we'd have miniatures or just things that looked like miniatures, like bottle caps and and just whatever, move them around the table.
Our earliest sessions of using any kind of stuff was like I literally just bought a sheet of plastic or plexiglass and took a T-square and made my own grid, and then we would just use D6s, and which worked really well for monsters because it was easy to get a lot of D6s in different sizes. And
Yeah.
then like D4s were like, here, pick the D4 that looks the most like your hero. So
Yeah. I used to DM a lot with you get these big pads like that were used like taking notes in meetings, like I don't know, maybe 2.5 by 3 feet or something like that, maybe 3 by 4, I don't know. And there was a version of those that had a square grid on them, and we just rip off a new sheet of those and draw on it, and then we had all of our maps archived. I mean, they all looked like crap, of course, because they're all like just you're just sketching stuff really fast and putting miniatures out there, and that worked well. I have a huge pile of those somewhere.
So, a great innovation for third edition for me was when Wizards of the Coast came out with pre-painted plastic minis. Maybe not a huge fan of the random boxes, but having miniatures that I could just put on the table and didn't have to do anything to was amazing.
Yeah. I was never into the painting of the miniatures either. I was, I just wasn't any good at it. So yeah, it was. I used to buy miniatures from people who painted too. You could always do that. There was always. It didn't take long for that sort of cottage industry to pop up. Bigger than that now, I suppose. But there's always every hobby store had somebody who was selling miniatures in a display case there, and I'm sure the store was taking some sort of cut off of it.
We get a lot of like messages and emails for people for different things, and the first time around we were doing these live chats a couple years ago, and like one of the fans kind of reached out to us like, "Hey, I professionally paint minis." I'm like, "Whatever." And then they like sent me some like pictures or to their Facebook page. I was like, "Oh my god, these are amazing!" and Blues Light Painting. He's done some pieces for Matt Colville, but yeah, some of the stuff that these folks are doing is amazing, and seeing like you said, these cottage industries kind of pop up around gaming.
Yeah,
Some of which seem to be more lucrative than actually like the game companies themselves.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's been fantastic, and as our hobby, this love of games has become so much bigger in the last 20 years. Then it's enabled so many businesses. And there's so many people in the business of games these days that I have no idea who most of them are, right? I mean, it's like, you know, there's just a lot of people doing something in gaming.
Has anything been particularly like stand outish or shocking to you that was been like super successful related to gaming that you would never have dreamed of?
Well, I think I'd have to go to the whole streaming phenomenon. Critical Role would probably be, shows like yours, channels like this, and also it's not just in D&D, but it's in Magic the Gathering. Of course, video games is in a whole other league. I'd like to claim some credit for esports in a way. I feel like Magic the Gathering really pioneered the idea of competitive play of games. I mean, before Magic, of course, you had bridge and chess and games like that played competitively, but we took it to a whole another level, and then it was and we could see the connections of how that influenced esports going from there. So I mean, that's going back a long way, but esports and streaming of games are and just the proliferation of like every nook and cranny of gaming, I just got a Kickstarter notice of a plush owl bear,
Yeah.
like like okay, cool. Yeah.
Cool. And is that going to be shut down? Um, it it is crazy, to think back to the time when I didn't even want people to know that I was a gamer and gaming. To how mainstream it's become, and how much in the mainstream conscious it is. Like you can say Dungeons and Dragons to most people now, and like something comes to mind, right? It may not be the right thing, but like they have an idea in their head what that means.
Right, right, right. And it's closer than the ideas people had when you would mention it in the 90s
Yeah.
or the 80s. I mean, 80s people just didn't know, right? They just thought it was
Yeah.
a satanic cult or something, and then 90s it was like, okay, we realize it's not a cult, but it's really super geeky and weird, and
Did you
now
have
it's
to
like, yeah,
did you have to deal with any of that bleed over when you acquired TSR with this from the Satanic Panic?
no,
It was,
not
it was already
uh,
done.
yeah, yeah, it was done and over. We before that, like with Magic the Gathering itself, we had put some same satanic imagery in Magic the Gathering that we took out, and I kind of regret that. It's like, I felt like we kind of blimped out there. And it's like,
Yeah.
but by the late '90s, we were over that, and when we acquired D&D, I very quickly said, I want to put demons and devils back in the game, and let's do it in a big way. And so we did there was a supplement that was already partially written, but had been archived or something. Somebody like, I think Monty Cook would have the full story on that. I don't, the details are a little fuzzy, but it's called The Paladin in Hell. And so, yeah, let's publish this
Yeah.
and let's
Yeah.
put demons and devils in this thing, and let's go.
Ram it down their throats. So Brian wants to know: can you talk to the way D&D and Magic the Gathering are viewed as products? Is D&D getting fishes in the basement while Magic the Gathering gets the resources they're desired? I mean, I can guess it's like one produces a lot more money than the other.
Well, first of all, I have no idea the answer to that question since 2001. I mean, I
Yeah,
left,
yeah. A little out of the loop.
yeah,
Hey,
so
Peter,
yeah,
you know that was 20 years ago?
I know, 20 years. Yeah. But D&D, I certainly back in my day, in the late 90s, from the time we acquired TSR until I left, I don't think there was that sort of feeling among people that worked in D&D, especially since they had so many more resources than they'd had as an independent company. And, I was blessed with having sort of the best possible situation in terms of acquiring TSR, in that it was on the ropes. And so you take it in, pay off the debt, put some money in the company, get everything back into print. It's easy to be a hero in a situation like that, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna forget one of the comments in the chat that I'm gonna get to in a second. But yeah, and also like, when you had D&D, like there was so much stuff put out, you could build a fort out of it. Right. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like that at all, where, now the release is slower, but I also feel like that's intentional anyway. I think that's a good strategy for them to like prolong the life of the game. uh, People got burnt out on all the glut in third edition.
Well, yeah, and then the D20 phenomenon, opening it up to other people. A lot of people now maybe not even realize that at one point in time, people couldn't make stuff for Dungeons and Dragons legally unless they were affiliated with TSR.
Well, you couldn't in fifth for a while either. It took them a while. I mean, people were doing it anyway, because you can't copyright the rules.
But in those days, if you did
Yeah.
it, you got sued. I mean, that was like TSR did not mess around when it came to stuff like that. I mean, most game companies, period, did not mess around. I remember in the 90s having to go through this period of like, as companies trying to protect their intellectual property, there was these questions as websites became popular, as the internet as a place for discussion became popular, like back when it was Usenet and IRC chat, and people building intellectual property using Dungeons and Dragons materials and stuff. It took a long time to kind of sort out how companies should treat their because these communities, it wasn't at first obvious how beneficial these communities would be. I mean, you think about it, of course they're beneficial. But we had to go from policing to enabling.
What was that transition like? When the decision was made to open up the OGL and basically let everyone play in your sandbox.
Well, I think it was Ryan Dancing deserves the lion's share of the credit for that, and I thought it was amazing. It was, the reason for it though was a bit there was a self-serving aspect to it, which is like, well, if we realized that in the Dungeons and Dragons product line, there were certain perennial products like the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, and a few campaign setting books and so on, this is where all the profits being made. But to support this product line, you need all these sort of day-to-day type, you need new adventures and modules and expansions and stuff. The community wants to continually get fed with new stuff. And so there's kind of like a book business and a periodicals business. And in fact, literally some periodicals were part of that. And, the idea with D20 is like, if we let other people do all the pieces of this that don't make money, we'll focus on the pieces that do make money. So it was a great business strategy, as well as a strategy that let a lot of other companies come in and participate in the game. And I think it kind of stemmed off a certain amount of competition too, because there's people that were making D&D material effectively instead of doing their own games to compete with D&D.
And also too, like there's a lot of room in that space where where people can, the products that don't make money, force someone to make money, right? Like it's different for depending on the size of your company and your business, where that threshold is. If you're like a person.
It's not to say, we farmed out these effectively. We were able to farm out the production of products that we couldn't make money at because we were a big company with high overheads and so forth. But you're absolutely right. It wasn't like we were getting other people to produce stuff that they would lose money on. I mean, they might, of course, through the normal course of doing things like printing too much or whatever. But I one thing about business is each business out there, there's an area, a bandwidth where it operates efficiently, and you get outside that bandwidth and you don't operate efficiently. So Wizards was in the area where at the low end we had Dungeons and Dragons, and at the high end we had Pokemon. During let's say the turn of the century, and that was the bandwidth that we could operate effectively. Below, D&D, which is like a $20-30 million brand at the time, something that's $100,000 or $1 million brand, we couldn't operate that effectively.
So Brian has a question that we kind of covered a little bit. Maybe he came a little bit late, but Brian shows up every day. So
hi, Brian.
I'll humor him. Was there ever any avenues in 2001 for D&D to make it to TV or film? And you kind of discussed that a little bit about when you acquired TSR.
Yeah, we had Sweet Pea had all the rights for Dungeons and Dragons in perpetuity. So we had no, and they did do a Dungeons and Dragons movie with Jeremy Irons. It was generally regarded as not a great movie.
It was a movie.
It was a movie. So that it was an exclusive arrangement. So we had no opportunity to do a Dungeons and Dragons type movie. But the other obstacle is it just wasn't in our DNA. Like, we didn't know how to make movies. We didn't know. We were always trying to figure out how to do it, but we didn't come anywhere close. But we were also thinking about it for Magic the Gathering as well. And we had a lot of other things to do. So by the time I left, there was nothing. If there was an opportunity, I missed it.
So, do you kind of follow like what's going on in the industry still, or like that part of your life is kind of done? You're just doing your own things. I don't know, like if there's like a curiosity still, because like, oh, this is how I've done it before. I'm curious to how they're doing it now.
Tangentially, like I do tend to get kind of tunnel vision, and I am working on Chaldea, and I wake up every day thinking about Chaldea, and I work on it all day, most days. And so I'm not, but I'm always curious when I don't go out looking to find out what's happening, but I often find myself in a conversation like the one we're having today, and I learn about, I'm always curious, and I enjoy learning about the stuff I sort of stumble into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure you know a lot more about the industry than I do, right? Just because you're doing an interview show and you have a lot of followers and you have a lot of people that you interview on your show. And the depth of a lot of the topics and the breadth of the topics.
Maybe sometimes too much.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of friends from back in the 90s that I've worked with. I'm good friends with people like Lisa Stevens at Paizo and Luke Crane at Kickstarter. And, and so I kind of keep up with what they're doing. But there's so many people in the industry now working in different jobs who I don't have a relationship with. And it's also becomes more difficult to remember people. I'm getting older. My memory is not as good as it used to be, I'm in my 60s now. And so, I meet somebody at a convention, I used to count age I measure age by the number of times I'd have to meet somebody before it would sink in, like, who is that person? That's tough. And it's embarrassing, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, part of his age, but also scale and scope has dramatically increased as well, right? Even just the size of the niche and the hobby has grown, and then also as a person that like used to own Wizards of the Coast and owns Gen Con, I'm sure you just have more people being introduced to you than maybe you did before. So I think that would add to it as well.
Yeah, it does. It's I guess it's a high class problem in a sense, but it's so disappointing because you want to remember people, and I'm a loving guy. I like people. I like meeting people. I like forging friendships. But there's only so much. Attention is the currency of the universe, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. So, do you have a projection for a season two? Or what you
Of
guys are shooting?
Chaldea.
Yeah.
Oh, for Chaldea, yeah. I mean, it'll be a couple of years before the next season comes out, but we're working. We were working on it full bore before the pandemic. We have we have several episodes that are done in the next block of episodes, and more that need work. But we just had to stop work, and then it'll ramp back up once we start. But I'm not going to have more income to do serious production work until 2022.
So,
At the earliest.
what are you guys doing to kind of keep people plugged in and engaged?
Well, I'm gonna once we're done with these few episodes, I'll do what is pretty. Yeah, I'll start running games online, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean that's I do have kind of an interesting idea for how to do that like it'll either be great or it'll be a dismal flop, and that's okay. I can deal with that. You know,
Like many things.
it'll be interesting. I don't like to. It's always a challenge to try and well, how can we do this a little differently? And
Mhm.
when you play in that space, but I always try to play in that space of doing something a little differently. That often there's a low success rate, but when you are successful, it can be really really big. But you end up doing a lot of things that just like, oh my god, that was a bad idea.
Yeah. What would be like one of the maybe one of the games you guys produced back in the day that just didn't do what you wanted it to, but it was something you were personally excited about? I mean, because everything you
Yeah,
did was in the
yeah.
shadow of Magic the Gathering and D&D.
Um, well, I did a company. Yeah, I did a company between Wizards and in Chaldea. I did companies that I started with Jesper Mirfors and Paul Peterson in 2005, and we had this game with chips that were collectible, and you'd throw them. It's called Clout, and I thought that game was really good, and we're starting a company around it. That was very innovative, and it and actually the game, it's not that it did badly, but we never got it was we never got the manufacturing costs to be in line with where they needed to be in order for the game to have an attractive price point. So that was a disappointment. But before we gave up on that, I found this girls trading card property called Belisara, which I fell in love with and thought could be a really big deal. And it was designed by a Danish woman named Gitte Brinkard. And I thought she did a great job with it. We took the game and managed it and put money into it, tried to do an online experience. I don't think the online experience was quite where it needed to be. And with digital objects and stuff. And I just thought it was fantastic. And it just was, but we just couldn't get it to where it needed to be for the investors that we had on board. I was very proud of doing it. It was a very positive game for girls about empowerment and following your dreams and all these positive messages with fantasy horses and beautiful, but just couldn't quite make it work.
So, Magic the Gathering, what is that like? That's like 30 years old now.
Yeah, well, it was published 1993, so that's 27 years. It'll be
Yeah,
28 years.
closing
20
in.
years.
Like,
Yeah, closing
so
in on 30 years.
I imagine that's I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was probably your most like commercially successful endeavor.
Yes, depends on how you measure it. I was a very tiny shareholder in that company.
Okay.
So for me, it's certainly the biggest business franchise that I ever owned. I mean, we also, some people forget, Wizards of the Coast, we also managed Pokemon for the Pokemon trading cards worldwide, except for Japan, for several years. That was definitely a bigger business than Magic the Gathering, but
Okay.
we didn't own it.
Yeah, yeah.
We were licensees.
So
But for me personally, Gen Con has been more financially rewarding because I own a lot more of it.
So like, after doing those kind of endeavors, did you find yourself kind of like content, or like, okay, how do I top what I did before?
Yeah, there is a little bit of that. There was definitely that after Wizards. Like, where do you go after Wizards? And also, one of the factors of me leaving Wizards and after I sold the company, I started Wizards and left Hasbro, is that was that it got so, we were talking earlier about how Wizards couldn't be profitable with smaller RPG product lines, right? But it was just like every game that we did was that way. Like Wizards got to the point where we really couldn't do anything other than make Magic and D&D and Pokemon. I mean, that was all we could do. And if we started another game, we were always trying. We'd launch other games, and when you got product lines that sell in the hundreds of millions, I mean, Pokemon was several $100 million a year in revenue, and then you launch a game that does $200,000, it's a rounding error. And so then if you're being smart about business, you're questioning, why am I spending any time on this other thing? Why am I spending time doing a Netrunner expansion, or there's some weird something that doesn't have the D&D or Magic or Pokemon license, a brand on it, and that kind of like, well, that's not very interesting to me. It's
No,
like,
it almost feels like a, anchor around your neck, going,
yeah,
oh, I
like
want to
the biggest decisions I could make were things like how to do packaging better at Walmart. I have no interest in this at all, none. So did start working on a Dungeons and Dragons MMO before I left, but it didn't work out. So I thought that kept me at Hasbro for longer than I would have otherwise, because that was something I thought would be interesting. It was before World of Warcraft came
so
out.
close.
So close. We could have. I think D&D was well positioned to have been a leader in the MMO space, but we missed that opportunity.
But you're tabletop gamers, not computer gamers.
It's true, but we hired. We I think we hired appropriately. There's a lot of overlap in the cultures of like the employee base, the people that you would hire for either. There's a lot of overlap.
So where do you think that kind of fell down?
Well, I'm dancing around it because I don't really want to say anything bad about Hasbro. I have a lot of good memories of Hasbro, and Hasbro treated me really, really well. But Hasbro went a different direction and licensed off the interactive rights to Atari. And
okay,
so
fair enough. I won't press.
yeah. So I was like, oh well, okay. Now we don't have the rights to do this game, so I guess we're not going to do this game.
We're not doing this game. Well, somebody should be kicking themselves really hard, considering.
But you were right. We weren't video game company. I mean, maybe we'd have totally screwed it up, right? I mean, so I can't actually really fault Hasbro. Like they were, I was wanting to, we were projecting that it was going to be tens of millions of dollars put into this thing, and ultimately probably much more than that. And Hasbro was losing a lot of money on its computer games division that it had to do various electronic games of like Monopoly and Scrabble and so on. I don't know, Scrabble, is that a Hasbro game? I can't remember. Anyway,
there's a lot of them.
Yeah. I don't know that. I think if I'd have been in Alan Hassenfeld's shoes at the time, maybe I would have made the same decision and say, hey, listen, we're just not a computer game company. We'll license that shit out. So
it is interesting though to think like, these forks in the road, like, had you guys continue with that, would WoW even exist today? Would even people know what that was?
Yeah. Or
crazy.
maybe just would have fallen flat on our face. Who knows?
I don't know. I have faith and confidence in you. You've done some really cool things. I think it might have been one more, but we'll never. If they ever do a what if episode on your life, if the what if WoW wasn't, you might be the reason. So on that note, we're a little past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head out?
Well, I hope anybody watching will check out my new YouTube channel, World of Chaldea. We're doing my best to tell a great fantasy story, and
Yes.
that's what it is. It's mainly through comic book art and voiceover and sound effects. But once in a while, we scrape together enough dollars to do a live action shoot, and there are in this block of episodes we're coming out these days. There are two of the episodes, chapters 3 and 7. Ooh, or 6. I don't know. My gosh, I should know these things. Have live action segments in them. So that's a lot of
Very
fun.
cool. There are links in the description. As always, folks, go check them out. And until next time, stay nerdy.